welcome everyone. This is the Meet the Speaker session with Dr. Kristen Davis. It's an honor to have Kristen with us today, and so thankful that she could spend time both presenting and answering questions from you all. And thanks for everybody that's already posted questions through the session Q&A and chat previously. We have some great questions there, and it'll be great to hear some responses from Kristen. Just a few housekeeping things. We will have everybody's mics muted, and this is a recorded session, so we will want to post this on Echo Community so other people can benefit from the question and answer session. So we won't use full names or anything like that, just to keep privacy in case people are in areas where they would not like their names shared. But we'll also mostly do all the interaction through the chat window of the Whova app, or you can post it in the session Q&A, but it's a little easier to see real time with the chat tab that will be in your in the Whova app. With that, I'd like to get started. Kristen, thanks again for your talk. Thank you for spending this time with us. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, and you can maybe start with some of the initial questions from the Q&A. One of the first ones that we have on the top is from Jacob, and he says, "What advice do you have for respectfully navigating relationships with government extension agents as an NGO or private employee striving to offer assistance to farmers? How can we effectively support farmers without conflict with government extension agencies?"
Thanks, Elliot. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining this session and the earlier talk. I think this is a really important question from Jacob. Actually, when I was doing my PhD research, I was working in a project that there was a project with money from Farm Africa. They had operational funds, and we often worked with the government extension officers who were there in the in the locality. They had the capacity, they had their salaries paid, but they didn't have any operational funds. And this is the case in so many African countries as well as other parts of the world, in that, government people are there, but they're not always well motivated because they're lacking operational funds. They might not have transport. They might not even have an office and good technologies. And so I think it's important, especially in today's pluralistic environment, to understand, everyone has a role to play, and the government has a certain role. More and more we see NGOs and the private sector, farmer organizations themselves providing extension services. But I think we have to be aware of each other's role. We have to coordinate to the extent possible, and of course respect, the different positions and bring them to the table, as it were. I mean, if you're a project with, some limited amount of resources, it's probably still more than a lot of government agents have. And so, respect their knowledge, use the local resources, and do it with a coordination in mind as much as possible. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, Kristen. So yeah, there's another question from Austin asking, given the high numbers of farmer to extension workers and the general lack of training resources for extension workers that do exist, how can lead farmers or other paraprofessionals be leveraged to increase reach and responsiveness to farmers' needs? And how can these individuals be supported over the long term?
Thanks, Austin, and thanks for attending. I saw you were there during the speech, and it was good to hear your lightning talk as well. This is a really big area, I would say, for the future of extension. More and more, we're seeing lead farmers, community promoters, farmer-to-farmer extension, and it's an excellent way for government extension or NGOs to extend their reach so that they can reach more farmers. At the same time, there's trade-offs because community promoters or lead farmers, they don't have the same education and training that an extension agent might necessarily have. At the same time, they're there in the local community, they're known, they're respected, they speak the local language. So there's trade-offs there. And one way to leverage their position there and to use these kinds of people is to think about incentives. And there's been some research done on this topic in East Africa with the East Africa Dairy Development Program, as well as some other research has been done in other countries too. But it's not necessarily that they need a salary or to be paid, even though it is nice to reward them for their time because they have a full-time job as a farmer as well. But a lot of times the incentives might not be what we think. They might be status in the community. It might be just a signboard at their outside their farm or their gate that says, here's a community extension worker. So there's different ways that we can incentivize them. Providing them with additional top-up skills training would be another way to, provide them incentives and recognize their work and that they do as a community extension worker. Thanks, Austin.
Another question from Philip, somewhat related, saying, how can nonprofits help develop volunteer extension workers? And also poses the question, he says, do you think more pastors should be doing small-scale agriculture startups?
Yeah, thanks, Philip. Yeah, it is related to the other, question that we were just discussing. These are, volunteers essentially. I think, actually the United States has quite a good model in terms of engaging their master gardeners and people who are working with 4-H and programs like that. They have a good volunteer program that might be a good model. And I think it's good to work, with volunteers and, bring in some old, retired civil servants who are in the rural areas now, maybe with their farm or their garden. They're probably looking for something to do and they're happy to share their knowledge. So I think it's good to look for these kinds of people who are sort of community mobilizers, who have skills and knowledge and would be interested to work with and help other people. I think more and more I am seeing pastors and churches start to develop these sorts of, agricultural outreach programs, community health as well. Even my church here in South Africa, we've got a garden project as well. I think it really does depend on their ministry and their calling. It's not like every pastor should go out and do this, but I think if you're in a really remote area and you're working with agriculturalists, I mean, this is a fantastic way to reach out to your community with very practical ways of helping them and engaging them. So thanks for that question, Philip.
Thanks, Kristen. Switching gears a little bit, Henry asks, kind of in relation to one of the comments you made on looking at some case studies in your presentation. He asks, what did we learn about the locust response in Kenya? What was done well, and what are some areas of improvement? Could you elaborate on that a bit?
I can give it a try. So I was not directly involved in that. I was looking at the desert locust, sort of fight in the region in general. So I'm not deeply familiar with what was happening in Kenya, but I do understand that FAO, and in the case of Uganda, at least, the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry, and Fisheries was very busy out spraying trees and doing all sorts of things, which, it does take a small army to fight such a plague. But at the same time, really good communication is needed. We actually had a program in Ethiopia with fall armyworm where we were trying to have an integrated early warning system using videos to inform farmers about how to deal with fall armyworm, using integrated voice response, IVR, so farmers could call into a hotline if they saw armyworm and let people know about that. And then there was pheromone traps to also inform the committee in Ethiopia about what to do with it. So that was all well and good and used a lot of great technologies. The farmers actually adopted a lot of the fall armyworm practices, but at the same time, the data management did not go so well, and it was hard to know what kind of data to collect and where and when and how to deal with that data. So I think hopefully for the next pest outbreak, there'll be a much better response in the whole East African region, and we'll be able to have a lot less crop damage and loss as a result of that.
That's great. Ryan asks, just in the light of our current situation of COVID, it's made apparent the fragility of our global food system. How can farmers benefit from existing structures, grants and resources and other support, but also keeping an eye to the time when possibly none of those will be available? And then he also poses a comment, generally a comparison of closed loop production versus input heavy production. I'm not exactly sure where he's going with that, but if you have any insight on, I think it's an interesting piece of what, kind of like what you talked about of different ways that they're switching in light of COVID, but
Yeah.
how do you rely on them, but not too heavily that when all of a sudden something breaks the chain, you're out of luck?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, I'm with Elliot. I'm not quite sure about the second part of your comment or question, but certainly I think what COVID has really shown us is that the world as we know it can certainly change, and market chains can be disrupted. You know, we might not be able to export our vegetables. Um, you know, extension agents won't be able to come out and see you. So many things can change. And so it's extremely important to be as self-reliant as we can, and to depend upon ourselves and to have options available to switch to local market production instead of trying to export your French cut green beans to Europe or something like that. Certainly, when there are opportunities to get support and resources, we should certainly take advantage of them. But it's really important, I would say, not to rely upon, you know, help from government. It's very welcome, or help from NGOs or anybody. But at the same time, we have to be ready to do it ourselves, you know, if it comes to that.
That's great. Ramon, or Raymond, I'm not sure, but he asked a question, maybe switching gears a little bit, but he's wondering if there are any available technologies now that are affordable or free that can aid extension workers to reach out to farmers.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question in light of all the digital tools and technologies that we have. And I did see that that question was asked and answered in the other session when I was actually presenting. So you might want to take a look there. But certainly, if you do have internet access, or even if you don't, there's many resources. I mean, in the old days, they used to put CDs together with, you know, information library and stuff like that. I think most people have this online now, but even if you can't get online, you can have DVDs and CDs and USB discs that have free videos. You know, either put together by Digital Green, by your local government, by Access Agriculture. There's a lot of resources out there. The new Echo Community app that we just heard about. So I would certainly, if you have internet access, would encourage you to look online for those kinds of free resources to use. You know, radio is another one. It's not free. It's free to the receivers. It costs money for people to use, but I think that's another good way to reach your audience as well.
Great, thanks, Kristen. Thanks for the plug. Just a reminder to everybody, if you would like to post a question, you can put it in the session Q&A or in the chat window. I haven't seen many come through on this side of new ones yet. So yeah, love to get your guys' input. And also, of course, if you have a follow-up question to something that Kristen's already answered, that's great too. Joseph asked a couple of different questions. I think, I'm not sure if you're in this session, Joseph, but if I don't quite get your question right, let us know and we can repose it. But looks like he may be working in Kenya, and one of his questions is talking about the extension agents in many areas of Kenya are less motivated, and they're not very well facilitated, and they're not given priority. And it may be because agriculture is not a priority, but he's asking, I think, asking if you have any insight on how to fix that problem, maybe break that cycle of agriculture not being given priority.
Okay, yes, thanks, Joseph. Asante sana. These are excellent questions, and this is a big issue in extension globally, actually. I mean, I think all of us, those working with small-scale farmers, those in extension, easily recognize the importance of extension and the role that it plays and the value that it brings. Extension as a program is very, very difficult to evaluate and to prove or to show the attribution of extension to impacts of small scale farmers' lives. What this really means is that you can't go to a policymaker very easily and say, for every shilling you put in, you're going to get X shillings out, because it's really difficult to show what extension actually does, because it's not just technical. Extension is also social, it's also cultural. It's also, it's got these human capacity building elements to it. So it's really difficult to actually show somebody what extension does. The problem in Kenya, if I may say, is that now your devolution means that the county governments are the ones making these decisions. And so far as I understand it, some county governments, there's a few of them that are actually putting money into agriculture. They're valuing extension, they're valuing agriculture, and so forth. But others, they want to put money to dams or to roads, which are also important. But I think it's really up to us to join the local communities of practice. In Kenya, we have the Kenya Forum for Agricultural Advisory Services, KEFAS. It's hosted by one of your farmer organizations. The National Kenya Farmers Organization, and I can send you the link for that. I'll put it in the chat at some point. Bodies like that are really important for lobbying to the government. Of course, you want to lobby with farmer organizations and others as well, but organizations like KEFAS are there to bring people together, to coordinate, to identify the priorities in that country for extension, and then to go to the government or to policymakers and say, you guys need to pay attention to this. This is really important. The issue of motivation is a big one. And I had mentioned this earlier, that oftentimes extension workers, they're just receiving a low salary. They're in rural areas. They don't have transport. They might not have an office, and they're not really appreciated for the hard job that they do. And so, all of this means that they can't do as good a job as maybe as if they were well paid or they had good equipment and so forth. So it's sort of a vicious cycle, because you can't get the money, because you can't convince the policymakers, so then you can't pay the extension workers, so then they're not going to do as good a job as they probably could. But there's some examples, if you talk to KEFAS or others, of governments like Ethiopia and Rwanda that are putting a lot of focus on agriculture. They're putting a lot of focus in extension, and they're trying to professionalize their extension services. They're trying to bring in the private sector. They're trying to increase pluralism in extension, and they're trying to do a lot of upskilling their extension workers and so forth. So we can look around and we can get some ideas from other countries, or maybe other counties in the case of Kenya. I'm not sure where you're located. So that's a bit of an answer.
Thanks, Kristen. We see Edith, you raised your hand. Do you have something you would like to ask? All right. Well, Edith, if you do have a question, you could go ahead and put it in the chat as well, and we can catch it from there. I'll go on to another question here, Kristen. This one from John. He's asking, just in light of natural disasters, just had 2 hurricanes in a month on the Caribbean side of Nicaragua. They're sending seeds and gardening tools, but are wondering what might be more effective approaches. Maybe setting up locations to produce plants for people to take back to their home, or is there other roles that you might see extension people working in agricultural extension to plug into relief work?
Yeah, thanks, John. I saw some of the destruction from some friends in Nicaragua um, via Facebook, but definitely this is one of those questions of moving, maybe a bit out of development and into relief work. I think Dr. Austin Moore from Catholic Relief Services also just talked about this in his lightning talk. But really, I think it's important that it might be useful to send seed or produce plants, but to the extent possible, let's do things locally. Let's build up local capacity rather than send in outside experts. Let's use local plants and local resources, or at least nearby resources, rather than send something from the far end of the earth. But it's all part of that whole resilience that Dr. Moore was talking about, and building up the communities themselves to be resilient to these kinds of disasters, and then having plans in place for dealing with the disasters. I know that the Global Forum for Rural Advisory Services, GFROS, met in Jamaica 2 years ago or last year, and the whole topic of discussion for that meeting was how can extension help in disasters, pre-disaster and post-disaster. So there's a whole lot of resources. There's a website called Eden Disaster Network that you can look into, which has a whole lot of ideas about how extension can help deal with disasters. And that's run in part by the University of Florida and Florida Extension, but there's a number of other United States Extension people involved in that. I'm not sure about the international angle, but it's certainly something that we're going to have to be thinking more and more about. So thanks for that question.
Thanks, Kristen. Kind of going along those lines of specific resources, I know people are looking for resources for different parts of the world. And Rachel wrote asking for if there are any virtual or online Master Gardener type classes available in West Africa. Could I advise my friends in Togo to take these classes? Do you know of any resources or things you might be able to point her in the right direction?
Not particularly. I'm sure we can point them to the ECHO West Africa group, and they would probably be the best people to talk to. I've been mentioning some of these country forums and regional networks of extension. So the global body is called GFROS, the Global Forum for Rural Advisory Services. There's a West and Central Africa network too, which then brings together all of the people involved in extension in the West and Central African region. And so if you get involved in that community too, it's called RESCAR AOC for the French acronym of it. I can also share these links with you in the chat. They might also be another source, but I would start with the ECHO group if they're still there, right?
Yep, yeah, they are there, and yeah, it'd be great to get you connected, Rachel, with the office in Burkina Faso. Yeah, there's another question here, just in general. Maybe you could highlight some of this. You've already highlighted quite a bit, which has been really helpful, Kristen. But Carl just asks, what African countries have strong extension systems? Maybe some good models that people can look towards.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I mentioned earlier the case of Rwanda and Ethiopia. So these are in the case of Ethiopia, especially very large, about 60,000 extension agents in the country. I think Rwanda has about 14,000. So they, as I said earlier, put a lot of funds, their own government funds, not just donor funds, into helping farmers. The Rwanda model in particular is quite interesting because they've done something very unique in taken farmer field schools and sort of built them into a national extension system that's a cascading model. So you have farmer field schools and your farmer field school facilitators, but then they're linked down to the village level to these farmer promoters who are another kind of lead farmer or community extension worker. And they also do demonstrations. And these guys are all volunteers. And by guys, I mean women and men. So that's a really interesting model. Both of those are obviously heavily government, led and provided. So there, you see less of the private sector. You'll see the odd NGO here and there, but not so much. In terms of more dynamic extension systems that maybe have more pluralism in them, Mozambique, Kenya, I know we've just talked about some of the problems of the Kenya extension system, but they have a lot more private sector providers. They have a lot more dynamism going on in terms of digital extension, a lot of interesting programs run by NGOs and the churches themselves and people like that. So there's a number of interesting models, at least in the East Africa region. There's probably a lot more in West Africa as well. The project that I mentioned a bit earlier that I'm leading, funded by USAID, has done an assessment of extension systems in 10 different countries. Honduras is one, Bangladesh, and the rest I think are all in Africa. So I'll try to post that website into the chat box as well, and you can look up those evaluations as well if you want to get some more information about different extension systems.
Thanks for that, Kristen. Maybe switching regions of the world here, and it's a bit specific, so you might not have great guidance, but maybe you know of some resources or even just a role that extension may be able to play in getting FDA approval for Eric asks, how would a small value added food processing company get FDA approval in Southeast Asia? He's wondering if there are any grants or other resources available. Maybe you could enlighten us a bit of that partnership between the entrepreneur and getting approval for export.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks, Eric. I really can't answer on the FDA approval. On the grants, I wonder if you might. I know when I worked in Kenya as a community extension agent of sorts for an NGO, that the different embassies in the countries all had small grants programs, and you could go get quite a simple application form and apply for small grants. I actually did some bucket drip irrigation using the Chapin bucket drip irrigation system in Kenya with grant from the British High Commission. So there might be something like that in your country. And we see a lot more, sort of competitive prizes for startups and that kind of thing. So you might want to look into that. But unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot of experience in Southeast Asia. But again, you might want to try the ECHO office over in Chiang Mai, if that's where it is.
Yep. Yeah, you got it. Yeah, I was going to mention too, Eric, it would be a great question to pose maybe to the broader audience on Echo Community, on the forum, on conversations. There may be people that have already gone through that experience. Possibly somebody's watching now that has, but if not, you could open it up sort of to the broader network, and certainly getting in touch with the office in Chiang Mai. They would have some other insights of maybe similar businesses that have gone through this process, and maybe could get you pointed in the right direction depending on where you're at and what you're looking to export. But yeah, I'd encourage you to check out the Echo Community conversations page to just get started, maybe seeing if anyone else has experience there. I think for right now, we're most of the questions that we had posed are have been answered. I have one other kind of one talking about recommended low data pest ID apps for phones. I'm not sure if you have anything specific for that, Kristen, but any other resources that maybe extension agents can be utilizing on their mobile apps would be great. Of course, as we just launched the Echo Community app, it's a great, I think it'll be a great opportunity for us to, for the extension worker and the farmer to get information directly into their hands. Maybe you know a few that are related specifically to Pest ID or other resources on that line.
Yeah, thanks. I actually don't know a specific plant ID app or plant pest ID app. However, I was in Myanmar at the beginning of the year, and we found an incredible amount of locally produced, like by the Department of Plant Protection, the Department of Agriculture. It was like every department was producing their own app, and so you might want to just start with some searches in your area and see if you can find something that would be produced sort of locally. The other people who deal a lot with plant protection are CABI. It's that international organization that does the plant doctor and the plant clinics, so they might have something on that. And then this group Echo that I've been talking about, it's not an app per se, but they're working on some additional modules. I know we talked about the new extensionist learning kit in the speaker session, and Austin was chatting and saying that he wasn't sure how many other modules there were. GFROS is in the process of producing a couple of extra modules on the new extensionist learning kit. One is on digital extension, so that might be of interest. And then there's a couple others on integrated pest management that will be coming out in the coming year. There's also going to be one on youth, how to engage youth in extension. So stay tuned for that in the GFROS community that I'll share with you.
That's great. Yeah, I was looking at that website the other day, and it looks like a lot of really good resources. It's a really neat, the training modules. I'd encourage people to check it out. We had one more question come in, Kristen, from Ender, and it's asking if you've ever been to Haiti or you know much about their extension programs there, and if you do, if you could share a little insight.
Yes, thanks, Ender. I have been to Haiti. I was actually an Echo intern back in 1992, and following that, I went to Haiti only for 3 months in 1993, but I had an excellent experience on the Central Plateau, and got to Port-au-Prince and La Gonave as well. But I don't know much about their extension agent. Extension system has probably changed a lot since then. But I do happen to know that there is a network called CAIAPNet. It's the Caribbean Agricultural Extension Providers Network. They have been starting to form a country forum of Haiti in this network. And I've actually done some trainings where the Haitians actually joined us. We did the training in English, and then we had somebody doing simultaneous translation to Haitian Creole. So I'll try to share the CAIAPNet network with you as well, and maybe they can put you in touch then with some of the Haitians that are there, and they can tell you more about it. But you can probably, you probably know more about the Haitian extension than I do at the moment.
Great, thank you, Kristen. I think that's all the questions that, if I've missed anybody, please let me know through the chat here. But I think we've gotten through most of them. Kristen, did you encounter any other questions or thoughts that you'd like to leave us with here before we close? We've got about 5 minutes left.
I don't think I've seen any other questions. We'll see if any pop up in the chat as we close. But I would just like to say it's a great pleasure and honor to be back with the ECHO community, albeit virtually. You know, I was there as an intern. I attended the first agricultural conference. I came back as a second-year intern or whatever it was called before I did my PhD research at the University of Florida. And yeah, I've stayed in touch with ECHO Network and the ECHO people since then. So it's been a great pleasure. I also helped organize the very first East Africa event with Bob Hargrave back in the day. So I really want to thank all of you for attending today. I know it's nighttime for some of you. I really appreciate your time and your questions and your energy. So thanks a lot for all of that.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Yeah, we are just so thankful that you could be part of this. I heard Bob give a hoot from the other room, so I think he's saying hi to you. And yeah, it's been great to just glean from your experience and your knowledge. Thank you for spending time with us. And yeah, wherever the time zones meet, everybody's meeting in different time zones here. It's great to see so much participation. So I would continue all, or encourage you all to continue discussing in the Whova app and any other questions you might have. Hopefully we can get those posed to the wider community. And as Kristen will still be available online virtually, and we can connect you with her through the app or other means through email, and contact info is available for her if you have questions later on. But with that, I think we will go ahead and close. Thanks again, Kristen, and thank you all for participating.